All right, so let's get into it. When we talk about the American Revolution, it's so easy to just think about the war, right? But today, we're going to look at it a bit differently, as a philosophical explosion. We're going to zoom way out and see how its core ideas basically lit a spark that set the whole world on fire.
So let's start with the big question, the one that really drives this whole story. How can a single idea, or a set of ideas, actually change the world? How did these concepts from the American Revolution, liberty, rights, all that stuff, how did they ripple out and transform not just the brand new American society, but the entire globe?
Because really, that's the best way to think about it. It wasn't just a war. It was an ideological earthquake. And the aftershocks, man, they would go on to shake thrones, break chains, and totally redraw the map of the world. So let's follow those shockwaves.
All right, so the very first shockwave, it hit right at home. I mean, before America could even think about changing the world, it had to face itself. Those powerful words in the Declaration of Independence immediately forced this new nation to look in the mirror and confront its own massive, staggering contradictions. It was time for a moral reckoning.
And this slide just lays it out so perfectly, right? The ideal versus the reality. On one hand, you have this incredible declaration, all men are created equal. And on the other, a nation whose economy is literally built on the backs of enslaved people. So how do you square that circle? Well, many of the founders tried to rationalize it. They'd say, liberty is a gradual process, or society isn't ready. But that contradiction, it was undeniable. And it became this engine for change, shining a really uncomfortable spotlight on the institution of slavery.
And this questioning started happening right away, especially up in the North, where the economy didn't depend so heavily on enslaved labor, which, made it a lot easier to take the moral high ground. Northern states started taking steps towards abolition. Even the Continental Congress, for a minute there, banned the importation of enslaved people. But, and this is a huge but, that momentum really started to fade. Why? Because the powerful economic interests of the Southern plantation economy just slammed head-on into those revolutionary ideals.
And a perfect example of this slow, complicated progress and its very real limits is Pennsylvania's Gradual Abolition Act of 1780. This was a landmark law, a huge deal, the first of its kind. But look at that word gradual. This didn't free anyone overnight. It was this slow, compromised process. A really important first step for sure, but on a very, very long road.
And this fight wasn't just happening in the halls of power. Individuals are taking the language of the revolution and turning it into a weapon. You had early abolitionists like Anthony Benezet using Enlightenment ideas to argue that slavery was just morally corrupt. And then you had these incredibly powerful voices like Prince Hall, who basically took that revolutionary rhetoric and threw it right back in the face of the Massachusetts legislature, demanding justice and equality.
But it's so important to remember that this reckoning wasn't only about slavery. That same revolutionary spirit started pushing for a much broader, more democratic society in other ways too. It was a direct challenge to all those old European ideas about hierarchy and who gets to have power just because of who their parents were.
And this wasn't just talk, right? This push for a new order had real concrete results. State legislatures started expanding voting rights. They made a very conscious decision to break from European tradition by abolishing all titles of nobility. The whole point was to build a system based on what you could do, not who you were born as. But we have to be super clear about the limitations here. The vote was still denied to a huge portion of the population: women, people who didn't own property, and of course, people of color. Still, it was a radical shift in thinking.
Okay, so what about the women? Their contributions during the war were absolutely vital, but they were still left out of the political process. This led to this really fascinating and complicated new idea called Republican motherhood. The thinking went something like this. For the republic to survive, it needs virtuous citizens. And who raises the citizens? The mothers. So women had this essential civic duty to raise good Republican sons, which conveniently justified giving them an education. And what's so fascinating about this concept is how it's a total double-edged sword. On one side, it gave women a new kind of civic importance. It was a powerful argument for their own education, which was a huge opportunity. But on the other side, it basically confined their influence to the home. It kept them out of direct political life. It was like an open door, but into a gilded cage.
But you better believe some women wanted a lot more than that. Abigail Adams's famous letter to her husband John from 1776, where she urges him to remember the ladies while they're framing the new laws, it's just iconic. It's one of the earliest and most direct calls for women's political rights in America.
And some women went even further.
Take Judith Sargent Murray. She made this incredibly powerful, direct case for the intellectual equality of the sexes. Her argument was so simple and so ahead of its time. She said, any difference you see between men and women is just because of a lack of education, not because of some natural inferiority. I mean, this is early American feminist thought, born right out of the Revolution's fire.
Okay, so let's pull back. It's time to zoom out and look at the second major shockwave. America's victory, which seems so improbable, showed the rest of the world something incredible. All those abstract Enlightenment ideas about natural rights and self-government, they weren't just philosophical ramblings anymore. They could actually work in the real world.
And the connection to the French Revolution? Oh, it's so direct and just dripping with historical irony. France, right? They funded the American War. That support plunged their own nation into catastrophic debt. To try and fix it, King Louis XVI had to call the Estates General, this ancient assembly that hadn't met in like 17 years. He thought it would solve his money problems, but instead, it just opened the floodgates for everyone to air their grievances. The whole system just exploded, leading right to the storming of the Bastille.
And you can see the ideological DNA so clearly. If you look at the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, one of the most important documents on human rights ever written, it just echoes the language and the core principles of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. The idea was spreading. It was contagious.
But maybe the most profound and powerful example of these ideals taking on a life of their own was the Haitian Revolution. See, the enslaved population in the French colony of Haiti, they heard all this talk about liberty and freedom coming from France. And they took it to its most literal, logical, and powerful conclusion imaginable. What happened next was it's truly one of the most remarkable events in world history. Led by the brilliant Toussaint Louverture, the enslaved people of Haiti rose up, fought, and won. They established the first independent black-led nation in the Western Hemisphere. Think about that. This wasn't just another colony getting its independence. This was people who were legally defined as property, as things, rising up and claiming their full humanity. It sent shockwaves through the entire global order.
And that brings us to our third major shockwave, a kind of domino effect of independence that just swept across the rest of the Americas. The success of both the American and the Haitian revolutions gave a powerful blueprint, a proof of concept, to everyone else living under colonial rule.
And when you look at a timeline like this, you can see just how fast that fire spread. That spark from North America and Haiti became an absolute inferno in the South. In just a couple of decades, the entire colonial map was redrawn. Nations from Mexico to Chile to Brazil just threw off centuries of European rule. The idea that a people could govern themselves, once so radical, had literally transformed a hemisphere.
So when you pull all these threads together, it becomes so clear. The American Revolution was so much more than just the birth of one nation. It really, truly was an ideological earthquake.
It didn't just reshape American society, sparking these fights for equality that the founders probably never saw coming. It reshaped the world. It proved that revolutionary change was possible. And it's such a powerful reminder that ideas, once you let them out of the bottle, can take on a life of their own. They can have consequences that go far, far beyond what anyone initially imagined.
Which really just leaves us with one final thing to chew on, right? How do these powerful ideas, liberty, equality, self-determination, how do they continue to evolve and inspire change and conflict, even today? Often in ways the people who first wrote them down could never, ever have predicted.